Okay, welcome everyone to the first webinar of the Biogen Science Enrichment Program, or BSE. We welcome Biogen as a partner with BIPOC Neuro. And yeah, let's start off with introductions. So hello everyone. My name is Mahmoud Sadeghi. I go by he, him, his pronouns, and I am the founder of BIPOC Neuro.
Hello, my name is Laika Mazar. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am the chief officer.
Hi, my name is Frida, and I also go by she, her pronouns, and I am the chief financial officer.
Hello, I'm Russell. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm the chief outreach officer.
BIPOC Neuro is an organization that is dedicated to advocating for the representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color within the field of neuroscience, especially women and those part of the LGBTQ+ community. Our organization serves to provide a virtual platform for all minorities to freely express and explore the world of neuroscience. So we are so happy for you to join us today, and we can't wait for you to meet our speakers. Passing it on to Biogen.
Hi all, I'm Jorge. I go by he, him, and I'm a senior associate scientist at Biogen, working in the multiple sclerosis and neuro repair research unit. Although I work at Biogen, the statements and viewpoints expressed in this webinar by myself and by my colleagues are our own and do not reflect the official positions of Biogen. So a little bit about Biogen. Biogen is a biotech company that focuses on the discovery, the development, and delivery of therapies for the treatment of neurological diseases. So when BIPOC Neuro reached out, we thought it would be a perfect fit to collaborate with them. So today I'm really excited to introduce you to two of my colleagues at Biogen, Mercedes Beyna and Sarah Stankowicz. Who will be presenting talks on 1, what is neuroscience, and 2, women in neuroscience. The first talk, as you all can see, will be by Mercedes Beyna, and a little bit about her. Mercedes is a scientist in the neurodegeneration research unit here at Biogen. She is passionate about welcoming young women, especially those of underrepresented groups, to join the fields in STEM. She's been captivated by neuroscience and has worked in the field for over a decade in both academic and industrial lab settings. Mercedes earned her undergraduate degree in biology at Binghamton University and has a master's in biology from New York University. Mercedes is currently pursuing her PhD in neuroscience while working full-time and is on track to graduate in 2022. So an early congrats to you. Mercedes is also a member of the Biochemical Pharmacology Discussion Group at the New York Academy of Sciences since 2010. And she enjoys developing interesting and educational symposia. So now I'm going to hand it off to Mercedes so she can start her talk. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Jorge, for such a generous introduction. And Frida, just for the moment, could you put my slides down? So I just want to be on the screen to say hello to everybody. It's such a pleasure and joy for me to be collaborating with BIPOC Neuro. We've collaborated last year, and this year we're doing it again. I welcome you all to this inaugural presentation of this webinar series this summer. And a little bit about me. Obviously, I'm a woman in STEM, the fields of science, technology, education, and math. I was born and raised in the Caribbean and immigrated to the USA to go to undergrad. So you heard I got my bachelor's in biology. And then I moved on to get my master's degree while working full-time. And the whole time I took jobs in neuroscience settings because I have a deep, lifelong fascination with how the brain works. Because you see, as a little girl, it was clear to me that so many members of my family suffered with mental illness. I've seen family members not able to hold down a job, not able to raise their kids. And alongside this, I've lived the stigma of people that have mental illness. People, a lot of times they're outcasts in society. And so with this, I've always had this passion about being in neuroscience and working alongside colleagues who are just as passionate to move the needles, to make medicines that not only help the patients, but their families heal. And yes, I am passionate about mentoring aspiring neuroscientists. I felt along the way, why not have a mix of the people, the scientists, the clinicians, the doctors, making the medicines The mix of these people, their demographic, why not that mirror more closely the patient populations and the people that we're working so hard to help? And so today, the topic is neuroscience. I only have 15 minutes with you, so I could tell you a gazillion things, but we'll only be able to fit what's but a snowflake on this tip of the iceberg that's neuroscience. So Frida, I'd like you to put up my slides. Thank you. So what is neuroscience? It comes from the words, two words, neuron, which means it's a specific cell type, and scientia, the Latin word for knowledge. So it's essentially the study of neurons. And most all organisms, living organisms, when you look deep down at them, the functional unit, the basic functional unit is a cell. And when you look deep into the cell, there's a whole universe of biological molecules. The molecules that hold the information for our genes, DNA, the molecules that help translate that information, RNA, the molecules that give the end product of the gene, which is proteins, and then a whole slew of other things that I'm not going to mention, the lipids that actually make the membrane, the bubble of that cell. So now that we're on the same playing field about what is a cell, well, what's a neuron? It's a specialized cell. And in the next slide, Frida will show you that it's a specialized cell of the nervous system. And the nervous system is simply your body's control center. It is what allows you to do, think, and feel, and all the reactions we do. It consists of the brain, the spinal cord, and all the projections of nerves emanating from them, right down to your fingertips and the end of your big toe. And the specialized cell that we're talking about that makes up this whole nervous system is the neuron. And if you click again, you'll see that neurons come in all shapes and sizes. You are born with about 86 billion neurons in your brain. Like you're born and you have all these neurons. And throughout lifetime, depending on the specific job of that neuron, they have different shapes and they sit in different parts of your body. But what's super common with all of them is that they have the job of communication. And what are they communicating? They're picking up all the sensory information, everything you see in the outside world, everything that's happening in the outside world, what you see, hear, touch, relay all that information to your nervous system, to your brain, and then your brain says, okay, how are you gonna react? And it gives back that new signal on the reaction. So what I mean is, if you touch a hot stove, your fingertips feel the heat, sends that signal to your brain says, retract your hand, and that's the action. And all of that is signaling. So in the next slide, we'll see that the neuron has a special shape that allows it to have this special function. And on the left side, you'll see where the dendrites are. So those are some tentacles emanating from the cell body, and its job is to take in that information. And then the information is sent down the body of the neuron along the axon and sent to the next neuron in line in which it's going to communicate at the axon terminals. And in the next slide, we'll see that the information passing through the whole of the body of the neuron is literally electricity. It's an electrical signal, an electrical impulse. The fancy word we have is an electrical potential, an action potential. And as this action potential electricity is moving from one neuron and it wants to send that signal to the next neuron in chain, what happens? The neurons are very close to each other, but they don't actually touch. There's a gap between one neuron and the next. And the electricity in the next slide, we'll see, Frida, that it needs to pass that gap. And how does it do that? The electrical signal is converted into a chemical signal. So in the next slide, we'll see that gap is called a synapse. And that chemical signal is coming off as bubbles of chemicals. And because they're transmitting a signal, we call them transmitters. And because it's coming from a neuron, neurotransmitters. You've probably heard of dopamine or oxytocin or serotonin. These are different names for different neurotransmitters with different jobs. So electrical signal becomes chemical signal. It gets picked up by the dendrite of this next cell in line, the next neuron in line, and converts again to electricity. And that's how the message gets passed. And when neurons speak together, as you're growing in life, you're getting more knowledge, more learning, it's not so much that you have new neurons growing and more. No, those 86 billion pretty much stay the same your whole life. But what's happening that makes learning happen? It's that the neurons that line up start to make a circuit, and the circuit gets stronger and stronger. And so in the next slide, I depicted this as cells with the same color, have the same job and the same information passing through. And so, for example, a little baby learning to walk. At the beginning of learning to walk, you can see they're very tentative, steps not good, fall a couple times. But by now, all of you in the audience, if you're fortunate, now do have the circuitry for walking, and you don't think about it anymore. It's automatic because that whole circuitry is in place. And that's a concept of learning. And one of the theorem we call it is neurons that wire together, fire together. So whenever you might have heard somebody say in reference to a certain behavior that they have, oh, that's just how I'm wired. That's why I did that. That's why I think that way. You're talking neuroscience. Exactly. That's your wiring. That's your circuitry. And so type in the chat for me. Is there anything that you know now that you have the circuitry for? Type it in, let me see. Like, for example, I have circuitry for driving now. I never used to know how to drive, and now I can drive without thinking, speaking to my passenger. I'm looking in the chat. Don't be shy, there's no right or wrong. Eating, typing, I see this, yes, exactly. You have all this circuitry there. Thank you for sharing with me the circuitries that you have. And we have so much more. Because the brain, it does a lot of things voluntarily. So you have to develop the circuitry to work your math problems, do your math homework. Some of you are musical and you maybe have written poetry, a love story, a love song. And those are voluntary actions that your brain can do, your nervous system can do with and for you. And then there are actions that another one that could be voluntary but not is breathing. So maybe right now you think of your breathing, take a deep breath in, do it with me. And out. So you've controlled your breathing, you've done that voluntarily. But also when you're in your deep sleep, unconscious, your brain is still working for you, still breathing for you, and does a lot of things involuntary in the background that you don't even have to think about, and you probably don't realize what's going on. Well, you don't, because you're not conscious of it. And so the next slide, so now I want to switch gears a little bit because I want to switch around all the stuff. I told you I'm a woman in STEM, and what do I do on a daily basis? If you came to visit me at Biogen, you'll see that I'm working to solve Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is named by the psychiatrist who first described this disease to us. And so in 1906 or 1901, I don't remember the date, he had a patient, 50-year-old woman, Auguste Dieter, and she came to him and he saw that she had a lot of difficulty with sleeping. Her memory was shot. He would say, "What's your name?" "Auguste." "What's your husband's name?" "Auguste." And she was married for quite a while. A normal functioning brain would not forget her husband's name. And also this could speak to not only the memory deficits, but maybe what we call the cognitive issues. So she was generally confused. And in addition to that, she had erratic mood changes. So 1 minute she's happy, 1 minute sad, 1 minute angry or aggressive for no reason. And so these are what we call the symptoms of Alzheimer's. And furthermore, he was taking good care of her. Eventually she died. And in the next slide, you see that he opened up her brain to look at it, did an autopsy. And on the left-hand side, you'll see what a healthy brain would look like. And the holes are normal, the black parts are holes, and those are normal, we have that. But in the brain that is suffering from Alzheimer's disease, you can see the black color is much more. So the brain is getting bigger holes and sort of shrinking in itself, getting smaller, disintegrating. And when he looked under the microscope, he could see that in the next, if you click again, please, Frida, you'll see that he described all surrounding the outside of the neurons, there was this clump of stuff. and he called them plaques. And if you click again, you'll see that inside the neurons, what he described was this mass and tangle of fibers and strings, and he called those tangles. And even though he talked about this 100 years ago, and we as scientists have made a lot of sophisticated understanding about this disease, there's still a lot of unmet needs, and we haven't solved it exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of complexity, mysteriousness, and devastation. And there's even right now 40 million people globally suffering from this illness. And so I work to understand what exactly is the function of tau and how can we keep it healthy throughout life. And I'm not opening anyone's brains to study this. I'm working with neurons in a petri dish, a fancy petri dish. We call it a cell culture dish or flask. And that's how I spend my days. If you come into my area, you'll see I'm in a white coat looking in the microscope, trying to understand what's going on so that we can design drugs to keep tau healthy. And yeah, it would be nice if some of you can come join me, come alongside me, and in whatever capacity that might excite you, also become neuroscientists. And not only for this particular disease, but you will, as you learn more, you'll see there's so much more in neuroscience that needs to be researched. And so in the next slide,
5-minute warning.
Thank you. Okay, so I have 5 minutes left. So I'd love to do an activity with you. If you will, please just watch this video and then we'll have a small discussion.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it, but did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at The Invisible Gorilla.
So type in the chat, did anybody not see the gorilla? Thank you, Russell. And I'm not surprised because you know what? That's how our brain works. Our existing neural circuitry that we get through our lived experiences help us decide what comes to our awareness. When we all experience and saw the same thing, or we all saw the same thing, but what becomes conscious is very different for all of us. And this could speak to blind spots or unconscious bias. Are there anybody here who, seeing the video for the very first time, also spotted the gorilla?
Mercedes, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, okay. So yes, and that's beautiful because half of the people will see and half of the people will not see the gorilla on the first time. So that just says our unconscious biases or lived experiences allow us to see it very differently. And we don't all have the same blind spots, but it's very human to have blind spots. They won't be the same. It's driven by our perspective, our worldview, background, cultural experiences. We're all unique. And one thing that I I bet you, if you ever see this again, you will always see the gorilla the second, third, fourth time. And why? Because now you've learned and you now have that circuitry. And I have one more question for you. If you have a group of people that you want to solve a problem, do you then want to have people with all the same world experiences, or is it better to have a mix of different people with diverse experiences? Because maybe then you're solving a big problem. Which do you want, same or diverse group? Diverse, I love it. And also, if I'd only shown this to a small group of people versus a larger group of people, what is the chance? What's the probability that we'll all see all the pieces? There was curtain changing colors, there were people leaving the stage, right? So that speaks to, and we want the people with the different experiences to also speak up and be included so that we all get the bigger picture together as a group, and that's how we bring innovation faster. And that's my message to you today. I also want to say I only touched on such a tiny bit. I tried to list a lot of areas of research. The types that I brought up were Alzheimer's, tauopathies, axons and dendrites, and neurotransmitter release, but there's so much in the world. Please explore, and I'll open the floor for questions. Please type your questions in the chat right now.
If you have any questions, feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat.
There's no right or wrong. I can keep going. I wanted to say thanks a million. I'm so happy you're all here. And I'm not seeing any questions, but I saw more of, I don't know how to pronounce your names. I'm so sorry. And all the people who have answered all my questions so far about diverse and thanking me. I want to thank you even more for being here. So 1, 2, 3, going, gone. We can move to Sarah. Thank you all.
Cool. I want to say thank you to Mercedes for that great presentation. And like Mercedes said, we're going to move on to the presentation by Sarah Stankowicz. So a little bit about Sarah. Sarah is a senior scientist in research in the translational in vivo science group here at Biogen, meaning she's a scientist in the early research and development here. For the past 3 years, she's worked to develop treatments for diseases such as Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, and schizophrenia. She works in the Neuroscience group, which uses measures of brain activity to understand how diseases unfold in the brain and test whether therapies are effective. In her free time, she sings in a choir and she writes science fiction and fantasy novels. Now I'm happy to pass it over to Sarah for her exciting talk.
Thanks so much, Jorge. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today and to talk about a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, as it is to Mercedes, the topic of women in neuroscience. Next. So the first question you might have is, you can stop right there. Perfect. The first question you might have is, why do we even talk about scientists and gender? You know, as you're all aware, we teach science to boys and girls in school. Boys and girls become scientists. So why is this even still a question? And so one way to start thinking about this is what comes to mind when you picture a scientist. So if you just close your eyes for a second and go, okay, I'm imagining a scientist. What does a scientist look like? You might have something like this. Next. The sort of most famous picture of a scientist, which is Albert Einstein here. But this is not necessarily representative of scientists today. This is an older white male scientist working alone, plugging away at finding the secrets of the universe. But a lot of science is quite different now. There are women, minorities in science, and I love Einstein too. He's great, but he shouldn't represent all of us. That's all I'm saying. And science is often so collaborative. When I think of a scientist, I think of a scientist working in a big team as well. All contributing little pieces of the full scientific process that we work on. So some of these implicit biases that we have, that we're picturing scientists a certain way, that might make it difficult for women to make their way in science as a career. Next. And so one way to look at this is to see, out of the people working in these different scientific fields, what percentage of them are women. And so the first bar graph here is the total bachelor's degree completion. So these are people that finish their college degree, and over half of them are women. So women are graduating from college at equal rates to men. But then when you look at people that major in science, and in STEM in particular, as Mercedes mentioned, now we're looking at only 35% of those are women, so a bit less. When you look at people that get jobs in those fields, in the STEM workforce, such as Mercedes and me working in industry, or getting a job as faculty at a university, now it's only 25% of those are women. And farther down the line, people that hold patents, so people that are inventing new technologies, that's only 15%. And way on the right, the kind of highest award that a scientist can get, the Nobel laureates getting the Nobel Prize in science, that's only 5% are women. And so this suggests that there's some ways to go still in bringing about gender equity in science, and making sure that any woman who wants to be a scientist can be one. Next. So overall in my talk, I'm going to talk about why this might be the case, what the current status is, and also how things are changing. So this is one sort of hint that the world is changing these days. This is a PBS special on Picture a Scientist, the fight for gender equity in science, where it was a special that followed all these different women scientists, both looking at their work as well as the challenges that they've encountered in trying to rise through their fields, and being, just a small percentage of women in those fields. Next. So one way we can begin to look at, these implicit biases that we might be holding. So I'll talk a little bit about what those mean. You can do a study, so as they did in this study, looking at whether there's any bias in hiring decisions. So if you're trying to hire a scientist, are you going to be less likely to hire a female scientist than a male scientist? Next. And so they did, blowing up the twist. So they did this study on male and female applicants, and they found that scientific faculty who are evaluating these applications rated the male students as higher than the female students. They were going to give them a higher salary. They were going to give them more mentoring. They generally just viewed them as more competent. And you might say, well, maybe in that batch, the male students were actually more competent than the female students. But the twist in this study was that the resume was exactly the same. The only thing that changed was the name on the resume. And so the faculty didn't know that that was what was going on. And so what they found from this study, and others like it, is that there was implicit biases against women. And so it's implicit because none of these faculty members would say that they would prefer to hire a male student, or that men are better at science, or anything like that. They would never say those things out loud, and they don't believe those things. But sometimes you can even hold positions like that and mindsets like that you're not even aware of, and that's implicit bias. Next. All right, next. Thanks. So this is contrasted with an explicit bias, so a conscious preference or belief, such as how much do you associate scientists with males or females? Like, as I said, you know, if somebody's willing to say, oh, I think men make better scientists or something like that, that would be an example of an explicit bias. Next. Next, please. Thanks. And this is contrasted with an implicit bias, so such as the resume experiment that I showed you before. But you can also get implicit biases even if the people know that that's what you're trying to find, even if people know that that's what you're trying to test. And so you can do that by running a study asking the question of how fast or easy it is to make an association between female and a science-related word or male and a science-related word. So you're doing like a button press, for example. And so they found that some people that have these implicit biases are faster when they're making an association between like male and test tube than female and test tube. If you're interested in testing your own implicit biases, anyone can do it at this link that's shown here in the slide, implicit.harvard.edu. It can be fun, and if you find that you do have some slight implicit bias, it's a good thing to work on. Next. So nowadays, we still have implicit biases that are affecting women's ability to rise up in the sciences and in neuroscience as well. So on the top left, we have science is still seen as a male profession according to an international study of gender bias. But the good news from this study is that they found that among the different countries that they looked at where these biases existed, the more women that were in the field in those countries, the less people feel that way. So this is offers us a way forward, right? That the more the better of a job we do at allowing women to advance in science, the less bias there will be. Another interesting bias that happens is the middle article title, implicit bias against women. Men are more likely than women to be seen as brilliant. This one was surprising to me too. That's never something I would have assumed looking at the word brilliant, but this just they get matched more frequently between men and the word brilliant. And you can imagine that might have some effects on the ability for women to get promoted, for example. And finally, committees with implicit biases promote fewer women when they do not believe gender bias exists. But we can turn this on its head to be a positive statement that the more people we can get to identify with the fact that bias still exists, you know, even in well-meaning people that really want women to be scientists, the more people believe that gender bias exists, the less implicit bias there is. Next. Yay, next. So yeah, implicit bias against women in science decreases with explicit recognition and belief that bias exists and more women in science. Ooh, and I look forward to getting to your comment, Madison, further in the talk. Next, please. All right, so let's talk specifically about neuroscience. So this is an issue that more and more people are beginning to care about. So this is a special issue of the Neuroscience Journal of new and evolving research in neuroscience. And what is the current status in neuroscience is that these sort of two career paths that you can take in neuroscience after you get a degree in or get your PhD. You could either become a professor at a college or university. And interestingly, what they found is that females get 53% of the neuroscience PhDs. So this is really good news because in the past, you know, this was more of a male-dominated field. So we're making a lot of progress such that the same amount of people are getting, the same amount of women and men are getting PhDs. But then when you look farther up the career ladder, so only 30% of them are faculty and only 13.8% of them are full professors. So it gets a little bit harder to become, to continue in this field as a woman. On the biotech and industry side, women are half of the total employees at member companies, and Mercedes and I were discussing at how great women representation is at Biogen in particular. We know a lot of female scientists, but they make up less than a third of the executives and only 23% of the CEOs. And this one I really want to be improved. Out of 180 leading biotechs, only 15 are led by women. So there's really a lot of progress that could still be made in the field in allowing anyone who wants to be a neuroscientist to continue in that field without these biases holding them back. Next. So I'm going to talk about my experience in the field and how I've moved through this field. So as I said, I'm passionate about increasing representation of women in science and in neuroscience. And so on the far left, this is me with the organizing committee of Women in Learning, which is a group dedicated to improving women in learning theory and in the neurosciences. And so I was in this group in my PhD, and we ran luncheons, really just bringing awareness to the issue, as well as being informal, supportive mentoring networks for other women scientists. At my postdoc at Boston Children's Hospital, I was a co-president of the Postdoctoral Association. And so I got to do some leadership in neuroscience. And looking back, this is the current board of the Postdoctoral Association is entirely women. So there's a lot of progress being made at that level as well. And by the time I got to Biogen, I've been blessed by extraordinary mentors. The bottom left picture is Yael, who was hired me into her group at Biogen, and was really just an inspiration and a fantastic female scientist and mentor. Top right is Sally, who's the head of our branch of R&D company. Also a fantastic mentor. And we even have currently the head of R&D at Biogen is a woman. And so I'm really proud to work at Biogen in particular, because we do care about these issues of diversity and representation. And we do believe, as Mercedes said, that you get better science done when you have more diverse perspectives looking for it and trying to solve these problems. Next. So this is just a little bit more of my story of my story through science and in women's representation. So in my research, as Jorge said, I'm working on Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and some other diseases as well. And we use mice to model some of these diseases. So this is me as a kid dressing up as a mouse, imagining my future in neuroscience. Also, I feel very passionate about outreach. So this is me giving a TED-style talk of my PhD to really, get everyone to understand the importance of neuroscience and to explain it to a general audience. This is me running a carnival for sick kids at Boston Children's Hospital, teaching them about neuroscience and doing little science experiments and just trying to put a smile on their face. I also think it's important that, yes, the Obama picture. I also think it's important to advocate for improved policies for women, women in the workforce. So this is me at a protest advocating for that. And finally, overall, there's just a lot more institutional support among getting women and girls to have the same opportunities in science as anyone else. Next. And so this offers a few ideas about how to move forward. One goal that we have is to dismantle biases to make sure that everyone believes that science is for girls too. Next. It's really important to provide support. So as I've had so much support in my career, I want to give back and make sure that the next generation of neuroscientists has access to mentorship, skills development, and networking opportunities. And finally, next, to keep women in science, we also need job reforms to employ and promote women, including political advocacy for parental leave and family support, among other policies. Next. So I really love this quote from Mae Jemison, the first African-American woman astronaut in space. Don't let anyone rob you of your imagination, your creativity, or your curiosity. It's your place in the world. It's your life. Go on and do all you can with it and make it the life you want to live. So I just want to leave you with that message that if you want to be a neuroscientist, go in the direction of your dreams, find mentors that are willing to help you on your way and support you and support each other. Because I really think that neuroscience is for everybody who wants to make it in this field. And we'd love to have you, as Mercedes said, come by. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
So I see a comment from Madison. 1 second, let me read. Oh, interesting. So Madison mentioned that even in a schooling setting, there can be these implicit biases, right? Where boys are more likely to be praised for correct work and girls are more likely to be discriminated against for their wrong work. And that seems super unfair, as it should. And so there's definitely biases to work at in all of these areas as well. Yeah, thank you guys too. I'm open to any questions, either about being a woman neuroscientist, what it's like at Biogen, or more fun neurofacts that both Mercedes and I love talking about. Yes, I can send that to you, Madison. Let me get out of Zoom and I can find that article. Wonder if I can put the whole article in the chat. Ooh, I can. You're welcome. So Women in Learning was awesome. I was one of the founding members. And we put on these luncheons where we highlighted female neuroscientists within our field. So this was at a conference that's dedicated to learning theory. So it's the intersection of psychology and neuroscience. And it was so fantastic to meet the speakers and to sort of facilitate them because they're all very established in their fields, and talking about how seeing how passionate they are for science as well as for gender equity was super inspiring. Thanks for the question, Mercedes. Mercedes, what's your, okay, how can young girls be introduced to neuroscience? Either me or Mercedes can take that because we both got introduced to neuroscience early on. So I think it's teaching them or showing them showing young girls fun illusions is a great way to get them interested in the brain, because illusions are the way to tell how the brain is wired, because you can see where it goes wrong. So illusions are a fantastic way, like the monkey business illusion. There's some really fun visual illusions. Look up change blindness, I'll put that here. Where if there's just a little bit of a flash in between two scenes, you can't see a massive change in the picture. It's very hard to find it. That's because we find changes based on movement. And so if you flash in between, the movement's gone and you can't see the big changes. Yeah, and just yeah, there's so many fun YouTube videos explaining different parts of the brain as well that are for different ages. I wish I had that when I was younger. I got interested in neuroscience through the Scientific American Mind series, which is like a division of Scientific American that comes out quarterly that's just neuroscience and psychology and cognitive science articles. And I just devoured those, thought they were so cool. How about you, Mercedes? Oh, Mercedes is muted. We need to unmute her.
Yes, I agree with all the illusions. I love that there's tons on YouTube. I also I got goosebumps when you put that quote from May, and she's so for me, what I think encourages young women is to see other women who've made it in the field and then they give back. So I don't know if I said it, but I'm half Black, half white. So I do want everybody to realize that I feel like, okay, you have to see one to be one. I think that is real. And that's why I step forward and I try to encourage in that way. I love mentoring, and I think women mentoring women, ladies helping ladies goes a long way. Not that I don't believe in other people, that's just where my little focus is. And I also
men can also be neuroscientists.
Yes. I also, because we don't want to lose diversity, we just want to increase it. That's all we're doing, is increasing representation, right, Sarah? And there's something I put there. There's a famous transgender neuroscientist, Ben Bard, and when he was presenting as a woman before changing, versus when he was presenting as a man, people would say, oh, your work is much better than your sister's work. It's the same person, just a different gender. And that's shocking. Same mind, just a different gender. He has an autobiography, if you're interested, look it up.
What's your favorite brain region, Mercedes, and what does it do?
Hippocampus, the seat of memory and learning, or initial memories are formed in the hippocampus. The hippocampus, I love nature, and it's the I don't remember the origin of the language, but it means seahorse. So it just melts two things for me: the ocean and the brain. Yours, Sarah?
Also the hippocampus. It's hard to beat. I also come from memory research, so you know, there's nothing cooler to me than thinking about how our memories form the basis of who we are, and how, you know, you accumulate these memories of the kind of person you are, the people around you, and that's your sense of self is based on that. So I love memory.
So in the chat, I'm going to drop a Google form right now. If you all can complete it and give feedback, and you could also be entered in a giveaway, it should only take a few minutes and it'll be very appreciated. Thank you.
We greatly appreciate every single one of you joining. Stay tuned for our next webinar, which will be on August 11th at the same time. Like Russell said, please complete the evaluation of this webinar. The link is in the chat, and it will also be sent out in an email along with a link to the recording for this webinar. And we really want y'all's feedback, and we value your time and your effort in joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we also really appreciate Mercedes and Sarah for joining us and sharing their knowledge with us, because it's a great thing to pass on information from one generation to the next, especially in neuroscience, and especially as we teach future scientists and make the world go round.
Thanks for having us.
All right, that should be it. Thank you again, everyone. I will be ending the recording now.